You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are back with another fun-filled, scintillating, high-flying, high-energy episode of our podcast. Was that too many adjectives, Bill?
I don't know. I mean, I like high-flying and what was the other one?
Scintillating, I believe.
No, and high energy, too.
High energy.
Why not? This was recorded on a Friday afternoon, so let's get as high energy as we want.
Yeah, before I lose all of my energy and dig into tired teacher on the weekend energy.
Well, but you've got a dinner and a date and all that kind of stuff. So, go out and have a good time. You young people,
Well, new developments in the Kristin Smart case today. It has just been reported in the San Luis Obispo Tribune, an excellent paper, according to Bill. And I think so, too, based on their reporting. The Smart family has filed a lawsuit against Ruben Flores for intentionally inflicting emotional distress on the Smart family by hiding her body for nearly 25 years.
The whole thing is just so disgusting. These people are like ghouls. It's just gross.
It is unbelievable. The civil suit alleges that in 2020, when search warrants were issued for the Flores home and several different properties owned by the Flores family, Ruben Flores, his ex-wife Susan Flores, and her boyfriend Mike McConville got together and moved Kristin Smart's remains from underneath the deck on Ruben Flores' property. And the verb they used is dispersed it to other locations, which, I don't know, that makes me wonder. I don't know. I don't like where this thought process is taking me.
Nor do I. And on top of everything else, we want to be clear here. When we talk about Ruben Flores, this is the father.
Yeah.
Not Paul Flores, who's actually charged with Kristin Smart's abduction, rape, and murder 25 years ago. This is his nearly 80-year-old father. So if this is a little over a year ago, he's in his late 70s, and his ex-wife Susan and her boyfriend appear to be participating or facilitating this digging up and moving of Kristin Smart's body. I know Susan Flores did an interview about a month or so ago after the San Luis Obispo sheriffs had done additional searches at the Flores home. Just watching the interview, her passive language and refusal to say Kristin Smart's name, it felt so dehumanizing. And I think this is all very deliberate on the Flores family's part. I think they're sociopaths, all of them. The mother, the father, and of course the son, who they now believe may have been a serial rapist and sexual harasser stretching back over 25 years back to his high school days. This guy's been known to have been a creepster for decades. I think the parents have facilitated and covered up for his behavior. I'm not sure if Kristin Smart is the only woman he's ever murdered. I am fairly certain from everything I've read and heard that certainly Kristin Smart is not the only woman he's ever sexually assaulted.
Yeah, agreed. The lawyer for the Smart family, Jim Murphy, is quoted in the civil suit as saying, in removing Kristin Smart's remains, Ruben Flores and the other two named co-defendants, they'll be named later, committed acts of such viciousness, depravity, and cruelty as to, by their very definition, cause severe emotional distress to the plaintiffs, the natural mother and father of Kristin Smart. And I think really that says it all right there. Viciousness, depravity, and cruelty.
I'm very curious to see when the other defendants are named. I'm thinking that it's going to be Susan Flores and her boyfriend. certainly when they're conspiring to do things like move Kristin Smart's body, they seem to be on the same team. I'm actually surprised, too, that Susan Flores hasn't been charged yet by the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Department, but that may be coming a little bit further down the road. I'm very, very curious because I believe all the way down to my toes that she is also involved certainly in the conspiracy to cover up this murder.
We are keeping all the information current on our social media pages. So if you are interested in the contents of this article, those are up on Mind Over Murder and Colonial Parkway Murders.
And speaking of social media and that sort of thing, as always, we want to thank you for your support of our Mind Over Murder podcast and ask you to continue writing reviews, especially saying nice things about Kristin Dilley, who deserves every compliment you can come up with. Don't you think?
I don't know that I would go that far, but okay. Thank you.
And a reminder that our friends at Podchaser are running a promotion right now. If you write a review about Mind Over Murder or any other podcast that you might like on Podchaser, they will make a contribution to Meals on Wheels, an organization we very much support. There's a twofer. You get to say nice things about Kristin Dilley, and you get to make a contribution to Meals on Wheels. So it seems like a win-win to me.
It's a win-win for everybody. Absolutely. Next week, we will be interviewing, by popular demand, Joyce Call Canada and Chris Call, brother and sister of Keith Call. We are very much looking forward to bringing you that excellent interview. We enjoyed talking with them. We always do. And they did a wonderful job talking about their brother, Keith. And we hope you will enjoy listening to that episode as much as we enjoyed recording it.
Not only are they two of our favorite people, I think that was the first time the four of us had an online conversation of this type. So it was really fun. There were some sad moments as well. We also used that opportunity of recording the interview with Joyce and Chris to answer your questions from our social media pages. Kristin had put out the call. If there are things you'd like to ask the Call family about the Colonial Parkway murders and about Keith and Sandy's disappearance, much in the same way when we interviewed the Haley sisters a couple of weeks ago. So we covered things like the van story that people have heard for years about the Colonial Parkway murders, where Chris Call saw a van when he was out late the night that Keith and Sandy disappeared. People have been asking us a ton of questions just in the last few weeks with the new attention as a result of the television show and so on. A lot of different stories about the details as the Haley and Call families remember them. I think the podcast affords us that opportunity, so we hope you'll enjoy it.
Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time. And we're joined once again by David Mittelman, CEO of Othram in the Woodlands, Texas. David, thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
We have an important question. Why is the Woodlands called the Woodlands? We always say Houston, but you're really outside of Houston.
Yes. We're in a small area north of Houston, and there's a lot of trees here. In fact, this is I think one of the largest master plans in the U.S., and there's a mandate by the Woodlands Development Company that everything be behind trees, which is cool because our building's actually behind trees, and it looks like a top secret, installation that you'd see in the movies. And I like to tell people it's by design, but in fact, the whole Woodlands is like that. Even the gas stations have to be hidden behind trees. It's considered unsightly around here. So there's a lot of trees here, and so it's kind of a small community that's grown over the last 30 years, but a lot of oil and gas folks here. We're certainly the only forensic lab, I believe, in the area. And it's nice. It's not different than, for example, being from Scottsdale, right? Scottsdale and Phoenix, that kind of comparison. Right. Mm-hmm. There's sometimes big cities, and then there's like one little small suburb that kind of overtakes kind of a larger than life reputation and story behind it, and people will then say they're from that area. So we tell people we're from the Woodlands. If they don't know what the Woodlands is, we tell people we're from Houston. Anyways, it's very beautiful here. If you ever come to, and our building has a lot of glass, so you can see the trees, and there's deer that walk by. So it's a pretty nice
look
view.
at that.
Now you know why it's called the Woodlands.
I see. So are there other businesses inside this beautiful glass building that you're inside?
We're the tenant on this structure here. So we're basically walled off from any other business. And we have, multiple levels of security to protect the laboratory, which is then encased in a larger space, which is then encased in a larger space. We even have a special door at the loading dock that is a Othram delivery door. And that door takes you into yet another room, which is not the lab, which is essentially like a shipping and receiving room. It's like an evidence holding room where either couriers, law enforcement directly can come visit us, or like FedEx will come to deliver evidence. And when that evidence comes in, it gets checked in. We initiate chain of custody, and it actually gets locked in like temperature controlled storage in that facility. And then what happens is later on, the laboratory will come out, the laboratory staff will come out, and they can check out evidence from the evidence room. So we have several different enclosures within enclosures that increase security, but also help us form like a really clear path of custody and flow for the evidence from delivery to our doorstep to the eventual return of that evidence to the agency when we're done.
Is it
Bill,
true?
I think we need to go visit.
I know. Boy, this sounds pretty high tech.
This sounds pretty cool.
I like the fact that you have a sign that says Othram, and then in small letters underneath it says, "We don't really say what we do." It's all very mysterious.
We have
multiple. Yeah, we have multiple entrances as well, depending on who you are. So it's an interesting plan. The laboratory is really, really nice too. We, as you can probably guess, we don't let anyone into the laboratory. I don't really even go to the laboratory that much, but it's all the rooms are also substantially composed of glass. So when you come by to visit, it's like an ant farm. You can't go in, but you can see multiple rooms in, and so it's cool. We built it for transparency, not just in the literal sense, but also so when we first started working on this, people are accustomed to seeing forensic laboratories. They've got the hood and the bench and the people suited up head to toe working on evidence. But that's something that we took and married to this idea of like large scale genome processing. We've got this thing called an Illumina NovaSeq 6000. It's the largest, most powerful sequencer in the world. And people are like, what is this thing that you call the Illumina NovaSeq? So we want to be able to show them. We can't let them in. So we've got it's like a zoo, an ant farm kind of zoo structure where you can see in. We tell people not to tap the glass because the people are working.
Disturbing the animals.
Facility. Yeah, you don't feed the lab techs and you don't tap on the glass because it'll startle them. But you let them do their thing, and we have this gigantic sequencer. If you've never seen a NovaSeq, it looks like a giant washing machine. If Apple was to create washing machines, and so that's the foundation of the sequencing technology that we use. We built Othram's technology upon that platform. Anyways, it's a fun visit. There's a lot of trees, a lot of wildlife, which we keep outside the building, and then a lot of cool stuff happening inside the building, along with the lab and this evidence room. And we have a proper office as well. We've got a proper office with analysts. We try to keep as few people in the laboratory as possible. Minimum staff, skeleton crew, just very quiet, efficient, and careful processing of evidence. Everyone else, the analysts, case managers, researchers, they're all sitting in a traditional office space that's kind of down the hall. And they do their work there. I mean, the only people that need to be in the laboratory are the ones that are contributing to basically feeding the big washer machine the DNA that comes from the forensic evidence. Once it leaves the machine, it's digitized, and it's just a stream of DNA letters that need to be sorted back together and used to reconstruct, people's DNA profiles and such. So all that's computer work, and that gets done in a proper office space.
But is it cooler than the lab on CSI?
It is. It's a lot cooler. And we have glowing lights. If you've been to my Facebook page, you'll see the window that lets you the transactional ledge in the window into the receiving room has this like frosted glass thing with the Othram letter cut out. And it's got like blue lights glowing around it. So we've gone the extra step to put in the lights and whatever else we can. I think it's cooler. I mean, all I remember seeing on CSI is the electrophoresis gels. And they look cool on TV, especially when the bubbles start bubbling from the water, but they run really slowly and they're boring to look at in real life. So I think the DNA sequencers are a lot cooler.
I don't even know what you just said. I remember the show and enjoyed it, but I don't know the technical terms for the things with the bubbles.
In the show, they'll have it's like a plexiglass box filled with liquid, and they load these things into this gel kind of substance, and they look for these little bands to appear. That's electrophoresis. So it's basically separation of DNA by size, and those patterns of size can reveal markers that are used to identify folks or whatever. And so I'm just saying it looks cool on TV because the bubbles are cool, and it glows, but it's actually a pretty boring process to stare at. It's like watching water boil. So our stuff's a lot cooler.
I feel like every time we talk, I learn something or another, David.
Something new. Well, David, we wanted to spend a little bit of time with you today talking about one of the cases that you were trying to get funded. And we're hoping that getting that case information out there will encourage people to help crowdfund this case. So if you would, talk to us about Saginaw John Doe.
Yeah, so I think you've seen recently we've been knocking out a bunch of cases in collaboration with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I love working these cases because these are generally older cases that involved unidentified children. And these cases are stuck. In fact, a lot of the cases, I think we talked about in the last episode, they've tried to use advanced techniques and they still ended up with no positive outcome. It just, tests run, but no answers generated. And so I love taking these cases that are trickier. It just feels really special to be able to bring value to a case that otherwise would have been stuck. There's plenty of cases to work. So we want to and we have very limited, obviously, in the greater scheme of things, impact that we can make. So we try to focus it where our efforts are most needed. And we have this case. It's from Saginaw, Michigan. It's a wild case. I don't understand the case. It's a young, I don't know how old he was, but it seems like a young man. He was shot. So he's definitely a homicide victim. He was shot and he was found literally hours, I think, after he had died. So it's not like, it was, skeletal remains or it was like years later. Like this is a young man that was found shot hours later, clearly a homicide victim, but no one recognized him. And there's even a really nice sketch, forensic sketch that was commissioned by forensic artists at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And I should have said at the beginning, you can find this case on DNA Solves, where we're currently trying to crowdfund it. And so this guy was a homicide victim. He was immediately found. They really know I'm sure they know exactly what he looks like. And yet he's never been recognized. And this happened in the fall, I believe, of 1988. So it's been like 30 years. And I have this feeling that he's never going to be identified without a little bit of help from DNA testing. So my case manager, Michael Vogan, I think this case spoke to him. It speaks to me. We really want to help them figure this out. And so my case manager worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and with the Saginaw Police Department. And we offered to basically crowdfund this case so we can just get it identified. It's just terrible that he's not been claimed. And obviously there's a family, he's a kid, so there's a family somewhere that's missing him. I don't know if they have a good estimation of his age, but they do believe that he was a minor. And in fact, that he may have recently or was about to graduate high school. They have an update. They have an update that they posted recently that they feel like he could have been at a high school. They identified 2 high schools he might have been at in Detroit. And so I don't know the rationale for why they think that, but those are the leads that they were willing to share. So we have an unidentified young man, homicide victim, found almost immediately, never recognized, probably went to high school in Detroit. Not sure how he ended up in Saginaw, but this guy needs to be identified. He needs to be reconnected to family.
So they think he might have attended Martin Luther King High School or John Cooley High School in Detroit. And Kristin and I talked about him when we featured Saginaw John Doe a couple of weeks ago on Mind Over Murder. To our eye, and keeping in mind that Kristin's a high school teacher, we thought he looked to be about, 16 to maybe 20 at the high side. Yeah. So sort of late high school, junior, senior, maybe.
Like a junior. Mm-hmm.
Young, handsome African-American kid. The paintings of him, which are renderings, the sketches are really beautiful. I mean, you really get a pretty strong sense of who this young guy was. But then, as I was saying a couple of weeks ago, it's just heartbreaking that this guy is found murdered and no one claims him.
Yeah, and like the thing that bugs me about this case is like, we talked in the last episode about another case, Grace Doe, right? But to this day, we still don't know what she looked like, because even after we identified her, it turns out she was adopted out at a young age, and there's like only a childhood photo of her. And you can understand the struggle, because there was really no evidence to work from. She was found long after death, and it's just been, the best guess possible on the behalf of anthropologists and others to kind of piece together what she might have looked like. And it's sad when it's still hard to identify someone. But here's a guy where you don't need any fancy anthropology. Like this guy was found, shortly after death. They know what he looks like. You've seen the sketches. We chose to run with the Nick portrait because I just feel like I really like the sketches that Nick does. They really like they restore a lot of humanity and just
yes.
The pictures feel alive. So I feel like, you can look at that picture and it feels like a real person, which of course he was a real person. He's not just a case. He's a real person that was gunned down and not identified. So yeah, it bugs us. And I think we're going to do everything we can to raise money for the case, fund it, and then help the Saginaw Police Department get the case solved. There's a lieutenant over there that's just very, very, very fired up about trying to make progress on this case. And that's really the recipe for success for us, when we find investigators that are very passionate, evidence that is suitable for testing, right? And then we can piece together everything else to make it work out.
So how much does it cost to crowdfund a case, and how much do you all currently have for Saginaw John Doe? We crowdfund. So our typical case from like end to end, so it's going to be like working from the evidence to doing the research and producing the leads, the laboratory testing in between. Our end-to-end budgets are $5,000 for a case. And so right now, I think we've just crossed barely over $1,500. So we're making good progress on the case. Obviously, we've got some ways to go before we fund it. And so that's a case right now that each one of us at Othram kind of have a case that we're really passionate about and just really want to get going. And this is my case that I really want to get an answer, not just for the lieutenant, but also for his family. Because again, they may not know, the family may not know about this. Undoubtedly, I'm sure that there's someone out there that's missing him. And, this case is 30 years old, but it's not that old to where there wouldn't be someone right now that is alive and well and waiting to hear something. So it's a case that I'd like to help solve.
I think this may be one of those cases like Grace Doe where people didn't assume the worst. In other words, they assumed that this person had relocated to another part of the country or had family elsewhere or whatever. And I don't think it occurs to a lot of people that this person might have been the victim of a violent crime.
It's very true. Yeah. A lot of these cases, if, for example, like this, the mostly harmless case we discussed in the last episode, right? That was a 2018 case. How could no one know who he was, right? The people didn't draw the connection because, he kind of retreated from family. He was known to go periods of time without communicating and kind of a loner and went off on his own to go take this hike. And at the end of it, unfortunately, he died while on that hike. But it didn't immediately trigger a concern on the behalf of family because he didn't have a lot of folks that he kept in touch with. And again, he was known to disappear. So you're absolutely right. Like, for all we know, perhaps they thought, that his family may have thought or his friends may have thought that he picked up and took off to another city to go do something else. It's just hard to know. But, we do know now that he's a homicide victim. We just don't know, who he is.
Right. In the mostly harmless example, by the way, I was thinking about that when we were talking about this with you last week. Vance Rodriguez, mostly harmless, his real name. Part of it's his personality. In other words, he tended to be somebody that would withdraw from communication with friends and family. And he apparently did this at different times during his life. So the idea that he would disappear for a while wasn't that unusual. And then I was thinking about this. It's a big country. Vance starts out in New York in terms of the last journey of his life, hiking down the Appalachian Trail, ends up dying in Florida, and then he's originally from Louisiana, as your team helped discover. Even there, the geographic data points, as you were mentioning last week, are really pretty widely spread out. He starts out in New York, ends up in Florida, passes away there from natural causes, they believe. But he's originally from Louisiana, and it's not until the social media and interest in the case grows. Preliminary research you did had said that he was from a particular area of Louisiana, but that bit of information, which you developed over time, allowed the ultimate identification to take place. Right there, we have 3 places which are well spread out and not necessarily connected. This isn't all something that happened in New York City or Florida or Louisiana, but in all 3 of those places and maybe multiple stops before that.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for especially for unidentified persons, for the unidentified remains and then the actual record of a missing person, for those 2 events to be separated by geography or time. So in the case of Mostly Harmless, there's definitely a disconnect between when he disappeared and people don't really necessarily know when he disappeared, and also where he was found. I mean, all of these things are disconnected, and so one of the powerful tools that you're afforded to when you use genetic testing is that you can kind of connect events that are separated by time and geography, because DNA will link you back to the proper family from which you came and allow you to piece together these seemingly unrelated events.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder.
How did you all start your partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children? That's an excellent partnership to have. How did that come about?
I think I've always been a huge fan of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I just think it's an amazing organization. I love kids. I was surprised to learn early on that in addition to pursuing missing and exploited children, they had an interesting forensic unit that is focused on trying to identify unidentified children. And there's perhaps 700 of these cases that require ID, a lot of them very old. And a lot of them, with the only remaining evidence being kind of, sparse remains, skeletal in nature, that are going to have degraded and contaminated DNA. So they're not just like these older cases, but they're particularly challenging to work with. I was just fascinated by it, and I really feel like it's the perfect complement to the technology we've developed. I mean, if you have a whole bunch of blood all over a crime scene, just scoop it up, and probably whatever test you do will be good enough, especially if it's a recent case. But these older cases where the evidence is not infinite and it could be in some ways challenging to work with, they need special care. And so it was exciting. I connected with them early on, and we tried a few cases together. Sometimes we work the entire case. We just work the entire case end to end, and then NCMEC supports us along the way. Sometimes NCMEC has a case that they've already been working, and they invite us to work on one part. The part we usually work on is generating a profile. So they may have one lab generate a DNA extract. They may ask us to build a profile, and they may have another group work on the genealogy. They're really good at building team projects. I think it's one of the really kind of hidden strengths of NCMEC is that they can organize folks from various organizations and groups under a common cause, under the same umbrella, and just make really great things happen. So, I love working with them. It's been very, very fruitful. And we've taken a good number of cases that have failed other methods and taken them to a positive outcome with NCMEC. So there's, like I said, 700 cases, I think, almost to work. And so as many as that they want us involved is how many will work.
How many cases are you all typically working at a time? Because I was looking at DNA Solves the other day to see how many you've got currently running, and it looks like you have quite a few. What is your typical caseload that you're working on?
I don't know. The laboratory machines scale really well, so we can run, it's tricky. Like, we don't do all the casework end to end, right? Like some of it we're just doing the sequencing for, some of it we're just doing this for. We have cases where, we work several steps. So it's, I don't have really a good way to enumerate all the different various cases that we've touched, which I think is kind of what you're asking. But I will tell you, like, we're built for scale, so we can run, a lot of cases. We scale really well. At this point, technology is not a limiting factor right now in us being able to work more cases. So that's kind of a roundabout way to sort of answer your question. But yeah, I think that we could run all the NICMEC cases if they wanted. I mean, our philosophy is, we work with law enforcement or people that are contracted by law enforcement, and we do what they need. If they want us to work the case, we work it. We don't want to push people, so we look for where there's affinity. There's enough cases out there in the world to where you can always find someone that's really eager to get something done. Yeah. And so we leave it up to them to decide how many of their cases they want to run with us. Some will throw a bunch at us at a time. Some want to do one at a time. Some aren't sure. They try one, they try many. It's just whatever people want to do. We have enough casework coming in, though, to where there's a steady flow. And I will point out, like, DNA Solves is a very small slice of what we do, because a lot of the cases we work, we work cold cases, but we also work contemporary cases. You can imagine, funding a contemporary case of DNA Solves is like probably not something law enforcement is going to want to do. In fact, even older cases, if they're criminal cases, we generally don't get buy-in to crowdfund them, because if you were to discover an important detail that might lead to identifying a suspect, like doing that on the internet on DNA Solves real time seems like a bad idea. So so you'll see there's a bias on DNA Solves generally for older cases that usually involve does that probably won't be prosecuted, or maybe the person responsible is not even alive anymore. We only report cases on DNA Solves if we have explicit permission from law enforcement. And that's just a very tiny slice. Law enforcement usually doesn't announce them. But when they do give us permission, we're very excited to do it, because, it's one thing for me to tell you on a podcast or in a news interviews, like, hey, your DNA could solve a crime. That doesn't resonate with people. But then telling people a story in which their DNA really did help solve a crime or identify a victim, walking them through how the investigators had this evidence and got this outcome, that's something that really speaks to people. So anytime we can share a story, we do, because we'll work a case with NICMEC, but then another agency will call us and say, hey, I saw this case on the news that you worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and guess what? I have a case that's just like it. This was what my evidence was. Can you help? And so I think the more stories you can tell, the more you kind of connect with other folks, either advocates to help fund and donate data and drive attention to the cases, or the law enforcement that see it and say, I think this technology could work for me because it worked for another case that was very similar.
One of the cases where you've had some tremendous success recently is the Beth Doe case in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. Now, they've identified this young woman as Evelyn Colon from New York City. Tell us about the case and about your involvement in the case, if you would.
This is a case that did not originate with us. This is a case that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children started working on with, I believe, the Pennsylvania State Police and the Carbon County Coroner's Office. And so the case is terrible. There's a teenager that was taking a walk. This was, I believe, in 76, end of 76. Was just taking a walk out somewhere and found gruesome parts of a person by a river. And they ended up identifying some suitcases at the scene eventually that contained parts of the same person. It was a young girl that was pregnant, and it's just a terrible scene. So I feel terrible for the person that even discovered the scene, never mind anyone else that's been involved in the case. And so obviously, this is a terrible case. They've wanted to know something about what happened to her. It's clearly a homicide. And so there's been an active investigation for years. I think that, I don't remember when NICMEC got involved, but there's been a lot of work from trying to reconstruct an image of what she may have looked like, examination of dental records, other biometrics, so many, like with a lot of these cases, so many attempts that had been used to figure out who she might be. They even did isotope analysis to see if they could kind of maybe get some clues as to where she may have grown up, when she was younger. So this is something that has consumed a lot of time for law enforcement and other groups for decades. It culminated in this reconstruction that's featured on NCMEC's page. And as I told you before, as with the Saginaw case, they just do a tremendous job of bringing to life victims. And even if there's not a lot of clues to work from. And so they similarly, like with Saginaw John Doe, generated for Beth Doe a really great picture of kind of an impression of what this girl may have looked like. But at the end of the day, they weren't able to identify who she was. And so eventually there was testing that was performed, a couple rounds of testing at other labs. And this is a case that I think was challenging. And so NCMEC asked us to get involved. We received evidence from another group that was working on the case. Our job was to use Forensic-Grade Genomic Sequencing. That's our tool that we use to pull as much information from that DNA as possible and try to build a profile that they could use to maybe identify who she is or find a relative. So we did that. We built a profile. So what we specialize in is taking DNA that is really terrible in condition and sometimes not even suitable for other methods or failed other methods. And we took that and built a profile, and we returned that profile back to the original lab that had started the case. And they uploaded into a genealogy database and found this amazing match. I mean, it was an incredible match. It essentially instantly identified who the victim was. It was, I believe, a nephew to the victim. It was interesting because if you read a lot of the press coverage around this, the nephew has been in the press, having said that, he had always wondered what happened to this person. And, was she somewhere in the area? Had she moved away? Had she started a family of her own? And so I think that in a way he was trying to reconnect with her. You hear a lot of the stories from the consumer DNA websites, right? It's like, test your DNA. You could find a relative you didn't know you had, or reconnect with a long lost relative. So I think he was trying to do that. And it is unbelievably fortuitous that at the same time he was trying to put his data in to reconnect with a long lost relative. It's been over 40 years, right? It was an old case. So at the same time that he's trying to reconnect with his relative, NCMEC is fielding this gigantic team project, which again, we were thrilled to be invited and included to help figure out if we can't reconstruct a DNA profile of who this girl might have been. And when the two efforts collided fortuitously, all of a sudden an ID was found. And even better yet, I always tell you in these cases, right, when you have a case of a John or a Jane Doe, like, how do you seek justice for someone that is unidentified, right? So for decades, they didn't know who she was. And they also weren't really in a position to figure out who might have done something to her. And, perhaps one of the greatest outcomes of this case has nothing to do with lab. It has to do with the fact that the investigators, in piecing together her identity, were able to identify who was responsible. And he was arrested, and, he'll go through the court system. But, just an incredible outcome that kind of starts because you have organizations like NCMEC that advocate for sorting out the identities of these children that are essentially lost to time. The efforts of family that have tried to find their relatives, and in this case, aggressively put information into all the available genealogical databases to make sure that if there was a match, they would know. And then the investigative work of the Pennsylvania State Police and the other agencies to then go back and try to trace back the whereabouts of this girl up until her death, and to then ultimately figure out who's responsible. So 2 puzzles, 2 cases solved with one effort. I don't know. It just feels like short of being able to bring her back to life, it's the next best possible outcome to be able to answer the question, reconnect her to family, and even, as it's not always possible, but in this case, we were lucky to be able to identify the person that triggered the situation and bring him to justice. So this is why I told you I love working with NCMEC. It's we can only do so much, and we're a small piece of the bigger puzzle. And when we get included, it's exciting because we get to help take these gigantic projects to positive outcomes, and it's becoming the rule, not the exception. You're going to see more and more cases coming out of NCMEC's hands that, again, through the collaboration of many organizations, private labs, law enforcement agencies, and otherwise, just start collecting enough evidence from all different directions, not just DNA evidence, and piecing it together to figure out who someone is and what happened to them.
It's an amazing story because for some reason, several years ago, I was reading about this case. And it was very clear even then that the Pennsylvania State Police and Carbon County law enforcement and the folks in the Lehigh Valley area had put a significant amount of effort into this case. I remember seeing a very in-depth write-up about every piece of evidence they had at that time, which is only like 2 or 3 years ago. And they were very focused on the luggage, believe it or not, because that was what was found with the remains. And I think they were thrown off a highway bridge, they thought, and they'd fallen into quite a deep river valley, which is where they were found alongside the water. They were working with what they had. So there were these very detailed photographs of the luggage, and they were hoping that somebody might recognize the suitcases. And
yeah.
I remember thinking at the time, what a long shot that was. And now here it is just a few years later, Othram and the other DNA labs around the country have more and more capability to work together to provide the scientific answers that were just out of reach 2 or 3 years ago. This wasn't even possible.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easy to say, like in this case, the DNA ended up being, a clue that made other things fit together. But, you just never know. The luggage didn't end up being the answer, but it may have been. Who knows? I've told you in our last segment, we've had cases that we have led with DNA testing, but then again, it ended up getting solved through some side tip or other means that don't necessarily always include DNA testing. So I think the analogy I used last time is like, you've got a toolkit. There's many tools in there. Whatever tool you've got, throw it at it. I mean, don't try the first one and then give up. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach the case, and it's just hard to know up front, what set of tools you'll need until you've already worked the case. And it's another reason why I think that, getting as much information as you can from as little amount of evidence as possible, so you preserve as much of the crime scene as possible. I think that's key. You don't know what data you need to get. You don't want to get 5 markers or these markers over here or a few over there. Like, get all the information you can get and then take all the information, combine that with all the information in the investigation and see what you can do to kind of bring a case to conclusion. That's just the best way to get it done.
I know that you can't talk about every case that you're currently working on, or probably even most of them, but are there any others that you're working on right now that are particularly exciting or thrilling for you that you would like to talk to our listeners about?
Yeah, I have more cases on the way. We have another case. We have a few cases that we'll be announcing. We'll see. It'll be a race. Will law enforcement do a press conference first, or will this episode air? You can take bets, and all the money goes to fund DNA Solves cases. Start a betting pool. We do have a couple cases that will be announced in the next several weeks. We have another case. That I'm excited to announce. It's a terrible case involving someone getting killed but not identified. But it's another case where identifying who they are has triggered a secondary investigation that's being undertaken right now. That's why it hasn't been announced yet. We identified the person, and now, because the person's identified, pieces are falling into place. There's another investigation that's been happening for years that now is tied to this investigation, and they will, be fused together to reveal a complete story of not just who the person was, but who ended up killing them. And I think that's just wonderful, because there's a lot of effort. There's a lot of effort in these cases, and when the trails go cold and there's no value that comes out of it, like it gets stuck. And so using DNA testing to connect two, kind of lines of evidence and pull them together, 2 investigations where the trail has gone cold, and you can fire it back up and connect them, because you now realize that these 2 investigations are on the same person. One investigation about a person that's known, one about a person that's not known, and it's the same person. And so that's just a remarkable outcome. And it's also cool because you don't know up front, right? So it's a validation. It's a true validation of the DNA approach, because you've, in an unbiased way, look to see who the relatives of this person are, who, and then ultimately who they are. And then to find out that person has been the focus of a missing persons investigation all this time is a validation that you're on the right track. So I love it. I love it when you can take these trails where a lot of effort's been applied, but they haven't gotten the right results and they've gone cold, and you can basically hoist them together, connect them, and then you've got a complete story. It brings a lot of value to a lot of folks, particularly the people that have spent decades trying to solve these cases. I mean, these cases gnaw on the minds of folks that have worked them over and over again tirelessly. I can't imagine what it's like to be a cold case detective. It's you have to imagine, especially until recently, like a lot of these cases do not solve. And so you put a lot of effort just because you really care and not because there's a high expectation that necessarily any particular case will just immediately resolve itself.
What are some of the other cases that you would like to highlight that need to be funded right at the moment? Are there any others that you're particularly eager to see become funded so that testing can be done?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we care about all our cases. The one that I'm working on right now is a Saginaw John Doe. You know, I think we talked in the last episode about Grace Doe, and we did that case in collaboration with Southeast Missouri University. That was our second case together. We have another case, a third one, that involves a John Doe that was found in Vernon County. So we've named him the Vernon County John Doe. He's from Missouri as well. Has never been identified. You know, he was found about 20 years ago, I think in 2000. And that case is actually almost funded. It's we're almost at $4,000 raised, and there's a total of $5,000 to raise for DNA Solve's case. So that's a case that's almost solved. We're excited to help CMO, as I said, on our third case together, not just identify the individual, but also build educational materials for students that are training for kind of the next generation careers that will help make this technology available to others. We have a case as well in Idaho. This is Bonneville County. And this is another kind of odd case. It's also 20 years old, coincidence, of course. But they found, partial skeletal remains belonging to a man. And it's actually not really clear what happened. I'm not sure if it's whether or not there was a sinister crime or, the possibility of an accidental drowning. This happened by a lake. So I think that's another case that we're going to be digging into. But in general, if you come to DNAsolves.com, and in the menu at the very top, there's a little item called cases. You can click that, and then you can filter. You can filter by cases that are not yet funded. You can look at all the cases. You can look at cases that are funded, or you can even look at cases that are solved and announced by law enforcement. So you can kind of sort through the list however you like. But those are kind of the cases we have right now on DNA Solves. There's, of course, countless other cases that are in queue. We try not to raise funding and awareness for too many cases because, by definition, if you're trying to raise awareness for every case, you raise awareness for no case. So we focus on blocks of cases at a time where we know there's public support and public interest. And then, of course, we have other cases that we're working kind of offline, like the one I mentioned that I hope to announce soon with law enforcement. But very often they'll let us announce the case on DNA Solves. So sometimes it's not a crowdfunded case, it's paid directly by law enforcement. But when they give us permission, we'll announce the success on DNA Solves, like I said, so we can add more use cases and excite people about maybe trying the technology for their own case.
Are you still hiring, David? People have asked us, how do I get into this field? Is Othram hiring?
I mean, like all startups, we're always hiring and we're never hiring. Like we don't have specific positions that we're recruiting for, but I mean, we're always looking to meet passionate folks, and our needs vary. Sometimes we're looking for data scientists and hardcore software developers. Sometimes it's lab folks. We sometimes we're looking for analysts. A lot of the time, we need people that are generally on site. So I know it's heartbreaking to move to the Woodlands. You can see it's.
Oh, come on! That's a beautiful part of Texas, and a great place to live.
We are looking for people that are on site. We run a really kind of unique business, and discretion is key. We like to be as transparent and engaging with the community as possible, but it's always done kind of with the blessing of law enforcement. And there are going to be agencies or even cases at agencies where we don't have the permission to discuss these work. And so we haven't really found a way to do that, comfortably in a remote capacity. So we are looking for people, no specific positions, but we're generally looking for people that are going to be here on site at the facility, hiding in the trees with us. And so if there's people that are interested, or people that ever just want to reach out about anything, you can reach us at Solve, SOLVE, at Othram, OTHREM.com. So you can always drop us an email and, ask about specific positions or really ask about whatever you want. We try to answer everyone's messages. I try to answer a lot of the messages as well. Sometimes we'll have people reach out about cases or just general questions about the field. Like we love talking about this, which is why, I'm glad we commissioned this 10-part series. I'm just kidding. Two-part series. Yeah, I could talk about this all day long. So anyone that wants to chat about positions or the technology or anything else, solve@othram.com. You can reach out to us, and we're always happy to chat.
Would you like to hire 2 loudmouth podcasters?
You want to move to the woods?
First, we have to reach the point where we can travel safely, but I think we're almost there.
We might.
Yeah. As soon as the country kind of restores normal travel patterns, we'd love to host you for a visit.
Yeah.
And show you what we're doing. But I think we will grow. Our goal right now is we're really focused on trying to bring as much value as we can to as many cases as possible. So we're just very hyper focused. I will do these discussions with you and other folks, and I try to engage the crowd because I think public support and stoking public interest is important. If the public is interested, it'll kind of push the rest of the system to take interest as well. But most of us are pretty narrowly focused on either trying to move active casework along or to build the infrastructure. For us, it's all about like the future. Like it's uninteresting to us to solve 2 cases or 20 cases or 200. Like we want to be able to build technology that will help solve all the cases. And so, true justice, right, comes in the form of testing that can be distributed to all cases and not just your favorite serial killer or your favorite John or Jane Doe. And so that remains kind of our core mission right now. Is like, it's not about just getting more people into our team to just kind of do more. It's about how do we build the infrastructure and the foundation that would allow us to, scale the technology without having to scale the headcount. And that's a real complex problem. It's a mathematical problem. It's a software problem. To some extent, it's a lab problem, but the lab's pretty well automated. And so I think right now, it's really a data science, math, and computer science problem. How do you scale the analysis and all the tools? Every case is different. How do you better incorporate and scale the different use cases and the different side tools that law enforcement would need to help take them to a good outcome? And part of that even happens before it gets to us, right? That's why projects like NamUs exist. NamUs exists to catalog these cases. The Pecos Jane Doe case is a really interesting case because Todd Matthews, he used to work at NamUs. Todd Matthews was actually the guy that found the case. Someone had sent the case to him, a newspaper clipping, and he's the one that advocated for its inclusion into NamUs. And if it hadn't hit NamUs, then, who knows if NCMEC would have noticed it, and who knows if Othram would have noticed it, and then who knows if this case would have gotten worked. So I think even before Othram, there's just a tremendous question of like, how do you scrape the information in the world to find these cases, to find these people that, are lost? They died or were found years ago before the internet was widely cataloging all our events. And how do you even catalog all the cases that are out there? How do you figure out if they have evidence? How do you figure out the evidence has, usable DNA? So there's just getting that, mobilizing the workforce to make all of that happen. That's a mission that's much broader than just Othram. But that's really a question we're wondering is like, how can we help ramp up the effort to take all these cases and do all the work before, during, and after Othram to make sure that they go from, unknown to solved and reported.
Thank you so much, David, for joining us and filling us in on all of your happenings and excellent solves at Othram. And we look forward to having you on with us again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, David.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.